Malik Johnson never asked to stand out. He was just another face in a sea of uniforms, quiet, polite, invisible. At least, that's how the teachers at Crescent Ridge Academy preferred him to stay. But one ordinary Monday morning, inside a classroom that smelled like chalk dust and arrogance, something happened that would change everything. When Mrs. Whitaker, the most respected English teacher in the school, accused Malik of cheating, she didn't just question his work. She questioned his worth. The room had gone still as her voice echoed. "There's no way a student like you wrote this essay. You must have copied it." Laughter rippled through the rows of polished desks. Cameron Reed, the golden boy of Crescent Ridge, smirked, whispering something to his friends. Malik said nothing. His knuckles turned white against the desk, but his eyes didn't move. Mrs. Whitaker smiled, that kind of cruel, polite smile people wear when they believe they're right. She tore the paper in half, right there, in front of everyone. "Next time, Malik, try writing something believable." The class laughed again. The principal said nothing, and Malik walked out of that room without a word. What no one knew was that the boy they just humiliated, the one they called a liar, had been writing under a name the whole world already knew. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The rain had stopped just before sunrise, leaving the streets of Southgate slick and shining like a sheet of glass. Malik Johnson watched the city wake up through the cracked bus window, his reflection fractured by raindrops that refused to fall away. He clutched a worn leather backpack in his lap, the same one his father used to carry to construction jobs before his accident. The edges were frayed, the zipper missing a tooth, but Malik treated it like gold. Inside were notebooks filled with stories no one had ever read. Crescent Ridge Academy loomed in the distance. Tall brick walls, manicured lawns, banners with Latin phrases no one from Malik's neighborhood had ever heard. The kind of place that made you feel small before you even stepped inside. His mother had saved for years to get him here, working double shifts at the diner, selling homemade pies on weekends, praying her son would get a chance she never had. When the bus stopped, Malik adjusted his tie, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, "You earned this. You belong here." But the moment he stepped through the school gates, he could feel it, the stare. The same kind that lingered too long, like curiosity dressed as politeness. Inside the halls, everything gleamed. Lockers polished to mirror shine. Students laughing too loudly about trips to Paris, ski lessons, and new cars. Malik kept his eyes down, careful not to bump into anyone. He was used to being invisible. But invisibility doesn't last long when you stand out for all the wrong reasons. During roll call in homeroom, Mrs. Whitaker's voice cut through the air. "Ah, our scholarship student has arrived. Welcome, Mr. Johnson." A few students looked up, whispering. One boy in a navy blazer nudged another, smirking. Malik offered a polite nod, but the heat rose in his chest. He took the empty seat in the back, trying to disappear into the wallpaper, but even silence can make noise in places like this. At lunch, Malik sat alone near the vending machine, a spot where the cafeteria's laughter couldn't reach. He ate his sandwich in quiet rhythm, eyes on the window, pretending the raindrops racing down the glass were competing for something. From across the room, Cameron Reed, the quarterback, the charmer, the son of the man whose name was on the library building, pointed toward Malik's table. His friends followed his gaze, laughing at something only they found funny. Malik ignored it. He'd grown up around louder cruelty. But this wasn't about volume, it was about power. The kind that hides behind smiles and uniforms. That afternoon, during literature class, Mrs. Whitaker assigned an essay. Write about what defines your character. Malik stayed behind after the bell, the room empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. He stared at the blank page and wrote the first line that came to him. Character isn't what you show when everyone's watching, it's what you hold on to when nobody believes in you. He didn't know it then, but those words would echo far beyond that classroom, further than even Mrs. Whitaker could imagine. As the sun sank outside the school gates, Malik packed his bag and began the long walk home. The sidewalks shimmered again, but this time, not from rain. From tears he refused to let fall. He wasn't broken. Just quiet. And the quiet ones are the ones the world underestimates, until they don't anymore. It was a Friday morning, the kind of morning that felt too calm to trust. The sun poured through the tall glass windows of Crescent Ridge Academy, touching every polished desk like it was blessing the room, everyone's except Malik's. He sat in the far corner of Mrs. Whitaker's literature class, his notebook open, pen balanced between his fingers. The air smelled faintly of lavender and expensive perfume, a smell that didn't belong to the world he came from. On the board, the words "Character Essay Presentations, due today," were written in looping white chalk. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the front, tall, silver-haired, her posture rigid as a fence post. She had the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice, the kind that came from knowing no one dared to question her. One by one, students went up to read their essays. They spoke about leadership, ambition, charity, words rehearsed to sound deep. Each one ended with polite applause. Then came Malik's turn. He rose from his seat slowly, papers trembling slightly in his hands, not from fear, but from memory. He walked to the front of the class, placed his essay on the podium, and began to read. "Character," he said softly, "is not built by comfort. It's built by struggle. It's knowing the difference between being respected and being tolerated, and choosing to keep walking anyway." For a moment, the room was still. Even Cameron Reed, who never stopped talking, went quiet. When Malik finished, the silence stretched, the kind that feels heavy enough to break. Then Mrs. Whitaker adjusted her glasses, looking down at his essay like it was a riddle she didn't want to solve. "This," she said slowly, "is impressive." A few students glanced at each other. Compliments weren't her habit. But then her tone shifted, that dangerous softness people use when they're about to strike. "Almost too impressive." Malik frowned slightly. "Ma'am, you expect me to believe you wrote this," she said, her smile thin as paper. "You, a student who barely speaks, from where again?" "Southgate." Laughter flickered in the room. Someone whispered, "Oh." Mrs. Whitaker continued, her voice dripping with calm cruelty. "I've taught for 20 years, Malik. I know my students' abilities. This essay isn't your voice. It's far beyond your level." Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. "It's my work, ma'am. Every word." "Plagiarism is a serious offense," she said. "We have online tools to check for copied text. So let's save everyone time and admit it now." The class began to murmur. Cameron leaned forward, smirking. "Yeah, Malik. Where'd you steal it from?" "ChatGPT." Laughter erupted. Malik stood frozen, his face blank but burning inside. Mrs. Whitaker sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "You're bright, Malik, but dishonesty will ruin you. You can't fake intelligence. It always reveals itself in the end." She picked up the paper, and with deliberate, theatrical precision, tore it in half. The sound echoed through the classroom like a gunshot. The laughter died down. Even Cameron's grin faltered, uncertain. Malik's voice broke the silence. Quiet, steady, but sharp. "You didn't read it to understand me," he said. "You read it to confirm what you already thought I couldn't be." Mrs. Whitaker froze, the corners of her smile stiffening. "Watch your tone, Mr. Johnson." Malik didn't move. "I wasn't cheating," he said, his voice low. "I was trying to be heard." He gathered the torn halves of his essay, folded them carefully, and placed them in his notebook. No tears. No anger. Just quiet control. When the bell rang, he walked out before anyone else could speak. Cameron called after him. "Hey, genius, maybe next time don't copy Wikipedia." Laughter followed him into the hallway, bouncing off the lockers, clinging to his back like static. But what no one saw, not even Mrs. Whitaker, was that Malik didn't go straight home that day. He went to the library. To the old, dusty computer lab no one used anymore. He opened a hidden folder on the screen, one that bore the name MJ_Writes. Inside were dozens of published stories, each with thousands of readers and one familiar pen name. M.J. Carter, the mysterious teen author critics online had been calling the next Baldwin. And Malik smiled for the first time that day. "You want proof, Mrs. Whitaker," he whispered. "You'll get it." The weekend passed in a blur of silence. Malik barely left his room. His mother knocked twice, sliding a plate of food under the door each time, but he didn't touch it. He sat by the window, light from his old laptop casting a faint glow on his face. Each click of the keyboard was deliberate, calm, precise, like a surgeon closing a wound. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calculating. Because while Mrs. Whitaker tore up one essay, she had unknowingly opened the door to hundreds more. That night, Malik logged into his secret account, the one the world knew, but his school didn't. M.J. Carter. Thousands of subscribers. Readers from colleges, professors, even small publishers following his work. The comments were endless. "This boy writes like he's lived 1,000 lives. Who is M.J. Carter? Whoever he is, he's a genius." Malik scrolled slowly, stopping at his latest story, "The Teacher Who Mistook Silence for Ignorance." It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was truth, dressed as fiction. He uploaded it quietly. No name, no location. Just a story about a poor student accused of cheating by a teacher who couldn't see past her own prejudice. And then, he waited. By Monday morning, the story had gone viral. Shared on forums, reposted on writing blogs, quoted on Instagram Reels. Even teachers from other states were discussing it. At Crescent Ridge, whispers filled the halls. "Did you read that story everyone's talking about? It's crazy how real it feels. They say it's based on a true incident." Mrs. Whitaker walked into class that day with a forced smile, but something in her eyes had changed. Uneasy. Watching. Cameron and his friends were laughing about the story too. "Probably another sob story from some wannabe writer," Cameron said. "People love to pretend they've been oppressed." Malik said nothing. He just opened his notebook, the same torn essay tucked inside. But by lunchtime, everything changed. Because a university professor, Dr. Ian Powell from Emory University, had commented publicly under the story's post. He wrote, "This writing style matches that of my former student mentee, the young prodigy known as M.J. Carter. If that's you, son, the world needs to know your name." The internet exploded. Hundreds of comments poured in. Fans tagging Malik's page, screenshots spreading faster than wildfire. And then, someone made the connection. A student at Crescent Ridge noticed that M.J. Carter's author photo, a blurred silhouette against a library window, looked a lot like the view from their own school library. Within hours, Malik's secret identity was out. A single tweet read, "Wait, M.J. Carter is Malik Johnson from Crescent Ridge Academy? The same kid that got accused of cheating." The post hit 100,000 views overnight. When Malik arrived at school the next morning, cameras were waiting. Reporters stood outside the gate. Students stared like they were seeing him for the first time. Mrs. Whitaker couldn't look at him. She walked past, clutching a folder to her chest, her face pale. Principal Dean Thomas called Malik into his office immediately. He spoke softly, nervously, eyes darting toward the window. "Malik, the district's seen the story. The media's asking questions. About you. About what happened." Malik stayed silent. Dean Thomas sighed, rubbing his forehead. Mrs. Whitaker, she's under review. But the board's nervous. They want this handled quietly. Malik looked up for the first time, his voice calm but sharp. I was quiet. That's what got me humiliated. The principal didn't respond. He just leaned back, eyes heavy. You're in the spotlight now, son. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Malik stood slowly, his face unreadable. Tell the truth, he said, loud enough that no one can ignore it again. Outside the office, a group of students watched him pass. Some smiled in awe. Others whispered. And among them, Cameron's smirk had vanished completely. Because for the first time in his life, the golden boy wasn't the most powerful person in the room. The quiet kid from Southgate was. By Wednesday morning, Crescent Ridge Academy didn't feel like a school anymore. It felt like a crime scene, clean, polished, but haunted by whispers too loud to ignore. News vans lined the street outside the gate. Cameras waited near the fountain where students once took their class photos. Reporters spoke in low voices, microphones catching every word that slipped from the school's glass doors. Inside, the hallways buzzed with tension. Students avoided eye contact. Teachers moved like ghosts. And in the middle of it all, Malik Johnson walked through the corridor, his head high, his steps steady, the same torn essay tucked neatly into his notebook like a piece of armor. The whispers followed him like an echo. That's him. The real M.J. Carter. The teacher got suspended. Mrs. Whitaker's classroom door was closed that morning, for the first time in 20 years. A printed sign read, "Class cancelled, substitute to follow." Principal Dean Thomas stood beside two district officials, their suits sharp, their expressions sharper. Across from them sat Mrs. Whitaker, her composure cracked, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "You're telling me," she said through a tight voice, "that I'm being suspended over a misunderstanding? I was doing my job." Dean Thomas leaned forward. "You accused a student of plagiarism, destroyed his work, and humiliated him publicly. Now the media knows that same student is a nationally recognized writer under a pseudonym." She scoffed, eyes flashing. "He deceived us. He hid his identity." "He protected it," Thomas corrected, "because people like you never would have believed him otherwise." Silence. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. Mrs. Whitaker's voice trembled. "This is absurd. One mistake, and suddenly I'm the villain." "Not one mistake," Thomas said. "A pattern. One we all ignored for too long." When she left the room, her heels echoed down the hall, a sound that used to command respect but now carried the weight of defeat. By afternoon, Malik's story was everywhere. News headlines read, "Scholarship student accused of cheating turns out to be teen writing prodigy." "Teacher suspended after viral story exposes bias in elite private school." Clips from his stories were shared online, lines quoted over moody music. "Silence isn't peace, it's the cage they build for the ones they fear might speak." It wasn't just fame. It was vindication. That night, a journalist named Lena Hart, who covered education and youth justice, requested an interview with Malik. She met him at a quiet diner, the same one where his mother worked. No bright lights. No makeup. Just truth. She asked softly, "Malik, why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" He stirred his drink, eyes thoughtful. "Because I wanted them to see me before they saw my name. I wanted to earn respect, not surprise." "And Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked. He exhaled slowly. "I don't hate her. But sometimes the only way to teach someone humility is to make them feel small in the world they thought they controlled." Lena didn't respond. She just nodded, knowing that line alone would break the internet. 2 days later, the principal called a full school assembly. The auditorium was packed, rows of students whispering, cameras tucked discreetly in corners, Teachers lined up like statues. When Malik walked onto the stage, the room went still. He wasn't wearing a suit or tie, just his usual uniform, neat but simple. He stood behind the microphone, not as a victim, but as a voice. "They told me to be quiet," he began. "To be grateful. To not make things difficult. But silence isn't strength, it's surrender. And I stopped surrendering the moment they tore my words in half." Every eye in the room was fixed on him. Even the bullies who once laughed at him couldn't meet his gaze. "I didn't want revenge," he continued. "I wanted reflection. Because what happened to me isn't rare. It's just the first time someone decided to tell the truth, loudly." He looked straight at the students in the front row, Cameron among them, head lowered, jaw tight. "You don't need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes, you just need to write something that makes silence uncomfortable." The room stayed quiet for a long moment, not out of fear, but respect. Then, slowly, applause began. Not loud, not forced, but real. It spread through the crowd like a wave. Dean Thomas watched from the side of the stage, eyes glistening. He whispered under his breath, "That boy just changed this place forever." In the days that followed, the district released an official statement. Mrs. Whitaker resigned quietly. The school board implemented a new scholarship mentorship program, led by Malik himself. But Malik didn't care about policies or press. He cared about the notebook on his desk, now filled with fresh pages. On the first line, he wrote, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting what they did, it's remembering who you became because of it." Then he smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Because in a world that once doubted him, Malik Johnson had found the loudest truth of all. The pen was never the problem. The blindness was. The air was colder now, the kind that made mornings feel quieter, cleaner, like the world had exhaled. It had been 3 weeks since the assembly. 3 weeks since Malik Johnson turned a moment of humiliation into a movement. The story had outgrown Crescent Ridge. It had become a conversation, about bias, about class, about the silent weight students like him carried every day. College professors discussed it. Writers quoted him. And students around the country started tagging their stories online with one phrase. #WeAreNotCheating. Malik sat in the same library corner where he used to hide during lunch breaks. Only this time, the librarian, the same one who once told him not to take up space, brought him coffee with a smile. A small group of younger students sat around him, notebooks open, pens ready. He was helping them write essays for the new scholarship mentorship program the school had created in his name. The M.J. Carter Creative Initiative. One of the students, a shy girl with thick glasses, asked softly, "What if they say my writing's too good, like they said about you?" Malik smiled gently. "Then you tell them your mind doesn't come with a price tag." The girl nodded, grinning shyly. And Malik saw a little of himself in her, the same fear, the same fire. Later that week, Lena Hart, the journalist who first told his story, returned for a follow-up interview. The segment was called "The Boy Who Wrote Back." She asked him, "Malik, what's the biggest lesson you've learned since all this happened?" He thought for a long moment before answering. That not every fight is about winning. Some are about being seen. Because sometimes, being invisible is the hardest kind of pain, and the rarest kind of strength. Lena smiled softly. "And what would you say to Mrs. Whitaker now, if she were watching?" Malik looked into the camera, his eyes steady. "I'd tell her thank you. Not because she was right, but because she forced me to prove her wrong." 2 days later, Malik stopped by a local bookstore for a reading event. He was now preparing to publish his first novel, The Words They Tried to Erase. The store buzzed with quiet admiration. People lined up with books, eager for a signature. And then, a familiar voice broke through the murmurs. "Malik!" He turned. Mrs. Whitaker stood near the entrance, holding a copy of his book. Her eyes looked older now, softer, stripped of the certainty she once carried. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "I came to apologize." Malik tilted his head slightly, saying nothing. "You were right," she continued. "I didn't read your words to understand you. I read them to fit you into the box I was comfortable with. I'm sorry for that." He looked at her, not with anger but clarity. "People see what they expect," he said. "That's why stories exist, to make them expect something more." She nodded, tears threatening to fall, and placed the book on the signing table. "Would you sign it, for an old teacher who finally learned something?" Malik smiled faintly and took her book. He opened it, wrote a few words, and handed it back. Inside, she read, "To the teacher who taught me that silence can be broken with words." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes glistened. She whispered, "You're a remarkable young man, Malik." "No," he said gently. "I'm just a writer who stopped hiding." As the sun set outside the bookstore, Malik stepped onto the street, camera flashes lighting up the dusk. His mother stood waiting by the car, pride glowing in her tired eyes. She whispered, "Your father would have been proud." Malik smiled, glancing up at the sky, whispering back, "I know." He held his new book close, the same hands that once clutched torn paper now holding something the world would never destroy again. As he walked away, the voice of the narrator closed the story. "They said he didn't belong. They said his words were too good to be his. But what they didn't understand was that some voices aren't born to fit in. They're born to redefine what truth sounds like." Malik Johnson's story reminds us of something powerful. You don't have to shout to change the world. Sometimes, all it takes is a pen, and the courage to use it when no one's listening. He was mocked, humiliated, and doubted, but instead of fighting with his fists, he fought with his words. And in the end, the same world that once silenced him had no choice but to listen. So, if you're watching this right now, feeling unseen, unheard, or underestimated, remember Malik's lesson. They can tear your paper, but they can't erase your truth. Keep writing. Keep speaking. Keep believing. Because one day, the same people who doubted you will quote you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it, so more people can hear stories that remind us all. The quiet ones aren't weak. They're just waiting for the right moment to roar. This is MR.GB. Stories, where every story reveals more than meets the eye. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never let anyone write your story for you.